in post-secondary. I do know many facilities for the K through 12 actually have computers in the classrooms that they are using. Canvas is specifically is not used in K through 12. I know it's used for post-secondary. Any comments additionally for what we've added here for the new 8? Okay, we had a new 7 added, but I think that's now the new 9. If you scroll down for us, please. Hang on.
So my question, I guess, is this a new number 9? Is this added language down
Oh,
here added to
is
8?
added to.
It seems separate to me, but I didn't want to assume.
Oh, I think so. Were we saying? I think we were saying that was going to be separate. So then that paragraph that doesn't have a number by it, that would be a new number 9. And we settled on shall provide access to rather than actually providing. And then I think now we're going to find that the old new number 7 is actually going to address some of the things we've been talking about. The new addition to that was the facility administrator is responsible for ensuring that youth are available for, and this goes to what we kind of talked about, and transported timely to school for the full time designated for the length of the school day, which is 240 minutes for K through 12. The facility administrator shall develop policies and procedures to ensure that school attendance is a priority and youth are timely transported to and available for school for the full time designated for the length of the school day. That is redundant, it appears to me. How can we? I'm not sure where that came from.
This came from public comment attachment Q, I believe.
How do we use that? And how it can complement what we had wrote regarding absences and time out of class. Because it looks like now we're starting to say the same thing. And I think, Chris, this was kind of a lot what you were saying regarding like facilities transporting. I'm sorry, I kind of laugh at the word transporting because it's like we put kids in little, like golf carts and move them across the facility. So how do we use that and to make it not redundant from the other areas? Or do we need this because we addressed it in the about absences?
Yeah, that was an addition that staff had made after going through all the public comment and it looks like we did address a lot of those issues in the revisions that we just made. So if it's not necessary, we can swipe it.
Do the facility administrators currently develop plans around attendance? Is that already a requirement?
It's part of the daily schedule. So agencies are required to have a daily schedule posted on the unit. So I mean, I don't want to speak for Marguerite, just, across the state, you can walk into, we look for daily schedule. So I would say that schedule reflects the plan, right? So school is this time to this time, and then lunch is this time to this time, so on and so forth.
Yeah, and if kids aren't in school at 8:30, then I'm wondering, we need documentation on our log, because we document on our log, which most facilities will do, is that, the time that kids enter a school or the time that kids go out in the yard. Document where kids are up for programming. So
Marguerite, I might add, the facility schedule, although 240 minutes are required for the ed code, youth go to school, they have a mid-morning break, so go back to their living unit. Oh, facility specific. So they go back to the unit for a mid-morning break, they go back to class, they come back to the unit for lunch, they go back to class, and then they get out of school. So that 240-minute, 4 hours worth of education can frequently turn into a 6-hour period of time.
I'm going to say that's dependent on facilities. Our facility, we don't send the kids back to their units because that's just, it's wasted time for them moving all over the facility, but we move them out to the, we'll move them to go to the yard or to go to the gym for PE. But we have them take a break in the classroom, bring them a snack, and they're hanging out in the classroom because it takes a lot of time to possibly move them back.
Right. And with
So-
the potential new regulations.
And, but that's that's our facility. It could be
Right.
different. So we don't want to start dictating how facilities are going to do their routines.
Right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure that we understood that that 240 minutes is typically not one single moment in time. It includes in most facilities, except for San Luis Obispo, mid-morning break, sometimes an afternoon break, certainly a lunch, and the proposed length of time for consumption of a meal is going to increase, so that lunch period is going to be longer. So sometimes kids are not getting out of class until 2:30 in the afternoon. So I'm not sure why I'm bringing up that point, except to say for this post-secondary education piece, they may not need all of that time, that 6-hour block of time. They may only need morning sessions if they're taking 1 or 2 classes online.
So I guess let's go back to stay focused here. Too many squirrels at the table. Do we need this section that BSCC added? Or is it caught in the other points, especially the point that we just elaborated on regarding the documentation of why youth were going to be absent or have time out of the class? Because if I'm moving that we just exonate it, take it out, or just not add it in. Abigail.
I would advocate for keeping it. It's kind of a different point and frankly, a kind of more positive point. Like the other point is about reporting why things didn't happen. This is about like making a plan and, trying to improve. And so I would advocate for keeping it in. I think that it makes sense to encourage facilities to focus on the absentee issues, given some of the statistics that Chris mentioned.
And do we
Yeah.
like the way it is worded, or should it be, I'm hearing some academia saying we need to wordsmith it a bit to make it not so wordy.
So that it's not redundant, why don't we just say the facility administrator shall develop policies and procedures to ensure that youth are available for and transported timely, et cetera, to the end of that sentence, so that it's not a redundant statement.
That's taking out the first sentence. Is that taking out the first sentence, or is that?
Well,
Do we get to the point we want to get to in a positive manner by taking out the first sentence and leaving it stating, the facility administrator shall develop policies and procedures to ensure that school attendance is a priority and youth are timely transported to and available for school for the full time designated for the length of the school day? To me, that also includes is generic enough and inclusive enough that it actually includes any youth who are involved with secondary education. We good on that?
I think so.
Oh, Chris, thank you. Okay, you guys good you want to take a 10-minute break? I got a yes, please to my left, so we're going to take a 10-minute break.
Our chair just stepped out of the room for a moment. I think where we ended up is taking out that first sentence, facility administrator responsible, and leaving facility administrator shall develop policies and procedures to ensure school attendance, priority, and we might do some wordsmithing here. Youth are transported to and available for school for the full-time designated, transported to something that is where that timely fits in. And so, oh, there it is. Thank you, Amanda. So the next section is education shall be provided to all youth regardless of classification, housing, security status, disciplinary separation, and education includes but is not limited to services provided in a 504 or an IEP plan. So looking around the room to see if people had recommendations or recommendations for revision to that section. Chris?
So in the first section where it says, and it's in the document that I emailed as well, education includes but is not limited to. I recommend adding attendance in appropriate education setting outside of the youth's room, and then post-secondary academic or career technical education courses and programs.
So sorry, I'm just rereading this. Excuse me. So I think this section, I don't know if that's provided somewhere else or if this section is intended to ensure that education includes 504 plans and IEPs. So I don't know if it would be the right place to expand on and say and define what education is. I hear what you're saying. I don't know that this is the place for it because this is sort of the overall statement is that education is provided and includes 504 plans. There might be a more appropriate place for that language to go, like maybe even in the opening paragraph, because these are, again, required elements of the school program. I don't know if you heard that part, Marguerite. In section 11 on the screen, the recommendation is to add education includes but is not limited to attendance in appropriate education setting, so on and so forth. And I think that section is intended to include the special education services. And I feel like we've included those other things or could include those other things elsewhere.
So just to clarify, I believe that the exception about providing education when a young person poses an immediate threat to the safety of self or others applies when young people are receiving education in those settings, right? Like that exception would apply to young people who are in post-secondary, but if it doesn't apply, then I would agree that this wouldn't be relevant to bring up. But I believe that the exception would apply to young people in those education settings because it is a facility policy that you can exclude people. But if I'm misinterpreting that and how it operates in the facility, I'm happy to do without adding that language. But that's why I put it there, because the restriction around when you can remove a young person from school, from education is there. And I was trying to clarify that education includes those settings as well. But if that's not the case, then I agree it wouldn't need to go there.
I wouldn't put it there because I feel like it would be appropriate elsewhere. And again, perhaps I'm missing, what the intent of this one section is. Because education must be provided regardless. And then we're talking about appropriate education setting outside the youth's room.
The only time
Yeah.
a youth doesn't receive education in their room ever. And it would only be if they were on room confinement and deemed a threat to themselves. Like they're going to use whatever tools or instruments they're given, like pencil or paper, to harm themselves or use it as a weapon against an officer, which is so incredibly isolated. So I think to put that here is not necessary because I think that's going to go in room confinement or medical isolation or suicide prevention. You know, if a kid is in their room because and we gave them something they're going to harm themselves, and that's going to be under suicide prevention. I think that's what I think. So, Chris, did you want to say more, or
Just-
Abigail?
Just to clarify, when it says education, except when providing education poses an immediate threat to the safety of self or others, we're including post-secondary, career and technical education in that when we say education in this part. I just
This
wanted to make sure
Yeah,
that's
this
clear. Are
is
you
pretty
saying
broad, I think. Yeah, because we're
Okay.
not specifically saying anything related K through 12. Or this would be probably a really appropriate place. It would actually be on an umbrella because we're not saying anything about California Ed. Abigail.
Yeah, I think this is a really appropriate place to be clear that it's very broad. Unless we kind of fix that overall issue back in the definitions, I think it is appropriate. I agree with taking out the room confinement part because I think that's kind of covered in other places, but just to add, including post-secondary. I think what I'm trying to get at when I keep adding it, and other people also, is this is a change in the law, right? We have a change where post-secondary is a requirement. It's not like a cherry on the top, right? And so I think when we're talking about a section like this, which is like you cannot deny it, you can't discriminate based on classification, housing, security status, that has to apply to all the pieces, including post-secondary. So I would advocate for including that addition of post-secondary here, just to be a good reminder that this is not voluntary. This is part of what's required, just like an IEP service is required.
What if we said all education programs? Because let's be reminded too, even kids who are in community college, post-secondary, they have IEPs too. They have different, special needs that they're going to be, they have rights to in that level. So how about all educational programs? Educational or education programs?
It might help if we want to use that phrase, if we also add that to definitions when we go
Okay.
back. I know we haven't done that yet, but I think if we have a place in definitions that says educational programs includes post-secondary, that might help.
Okay. Are you saying that would be a good for definition generals, or could we maybe even add that to an intro paragraph to this whole section saying the following regulation is in regards to all educational programs, including K through 12, post-secondary education, career technical education.
I think that would be helpful.
Okay.
Again, this is new, so I feel like it's like important.
Absolutely. No, we're kind of creating the plane. It has already taken off, building it as it goes. We're just experiencing a little turbulence, people. Okay, are we with the added verbiage there? Are we satisfied with what that says before we move on to behavioral management? Chris, you have your hand raised.
And this might belong in a different section, so I'm not going to read the full text. I'm just going to state it. If it belongs somewhere else, I'm happy to discuss it somewhere else. But I really wanted to flesh out some guardrails around when the determination is made about a young person being a threat to themselves, because there isn't like even like a minimum reconsideration period. I know that facilities have individual policies, or I believe that they do, around how often they reconsider a young person as a threat to themselves, but I noticed that that wasn't present in this section. It's specific that young people can be removed from education because they're a danger to themselves or others, but it isn't specific to like what the reconsideration process looks like, how a young person is then determined that they're not a threat anymore, and that there would be some like minimum of like a every 24 hours it's reconsider or something like that. And I don't know if that needs to go into this section in particular, but I don't know if it exists in Title 15 in another place and I just missed it.
It does exist, and I believe that we are following it, and it's in room confinement. You have to, you can't, a youth cannot be in the room longer than 4 hours without it being an approval by a facility administrator or supervisor. And then after 4 hours, it actually has to be documented. A youth has to meet with behavioral health, and actually a implementation plan to reintegrate that youth back into the population has to be written. So that's in regards to discipline when they're going to be a harm to others. When a harm to themselves, there's a whole suicide prevention. So I do think, I'm giving you some explanation, but I think back to your point, those kind of things are going to go in some other point. So we know mental health and medical is still working on their work group, and regards to room confinement, where this would be when it's safety to others, that's addressed in room confinement and it has to be, can't be just whatever every 24 hours. It's prescribed in room confinement. So that will be addressed elsewhere.
And do you know if the room confinement section revision has addressed the like all but room confinement situations where it's like a young person in a hallway, for example? It's like not room confinement, but it's like room confinement-esque or similar to. I just want to make sure that those kind of
That goes
situations
under
that I think have been
separation.
flagged. Okay, that's in separation. Got it.
Room confinement is actually in a locked room where the only interaction they have with anybody is going to be with an officer. And that is only for safety and security reasons, and it has to be documented. Separation is for different reasons, so that's a different section.
All right, I'm
And
fine
that
with
could be
ending
in a
here then.
hallway, or separation can be, separated out amongst the peers. So any other comments before we move on to behavioral management? Okay. Let's get to behavioral management. Number 1, positive behavior management will be implemented to reduce the need for disciplinary action in a school setting and may be integrated into the facility's overall behavioral management plan and security system. Comments? This was a revision, I think, in 2019. Okay, number 2, school staff shall be advised of administrative decisions by probation staff that may affect the educational programming of students. I'm thinking there needs to be a little bit more, that's vague to me, so it appears to be vague to others. So Chris, your comments?
I was just going to add in writing that they'll be advised in writing and not just advised. And then, sorry, I was slow on number 1.
I'm sorry, you missed it. No.
But actually, you know what? I think it's addressed in our earlier feedback, so I'm fine without including it.
Okay, so you're saying school staff should be advised in writing of administrative decisions made by probation staff that may affect the educational programming of students. It's still, even in writing, that seems vague to me. I think it is it educational. I think even up here we're kind of saying it's vague. Okay, how can we make this a little bit more specific? Because I'm asking education, what's an administrative decision, or what are we deciding about educational program of students? Is, to me, that goes to attendance. That's what I'm looking at, is like school staff are going to be advised if if a youth is not being, is not in class. And that, to me, that goes back up to attendance, absences or time out of class, because if we're looking at behavioral management, we're looking at school staff may be advised, shall be advised, regarding a behavioral incident that would in fact affect the educational programming. But I just think this is vague. So any other, Michael, you may have some.
Can we add before the beginning of the school day?
We can to make it clear, but I think I think it's still even vague with what, Allison, not, I'm just,
You know what, I was thinking about making it a bit more proactive than reactive. So instead of the school staff being advised, what about, and you were on that path, Marguerite, probation staff shall advise school staff in writing of any incident, behavioral or otherwise, that caused a young person to not be able to attend school, something to that effect, no.
That they will not be in school.
Right, that they won't be in school because of, yeah.
But I go back to, is this just K-12? Or if they're in online programming that doesn't have a set schedule, who are they advising? So
thoughts there.
are we advising the college professor?
So, I think if we said juvenile court school staff shall be notified of any student immediate. If you could put your microphone on so we can have this, they can hear what's going on. Again, that goes back up to the attendance, the absences.
It also goes to the communication between
Yeah.
probation and school staff in the initial paragraph.
Kelly, what do you have to say? Help out here.
Yeah, I could see if there's a way for us to word it. I think it is helpful to include like college programs where there's a partnership, but I do understand that we will have a couple of counties, or a handful of counties who don't have like a designated person at the college to provide that written notice to. So I wonder if it's, probation staff shall advise juvenile court staff and colleges with whom they have an MOU in writing of administrative decisions made by probation staff that may affect the educational programming of students, because I do think that at times there have been decisions made that come from a place of necessity within probation that don't necessarily get fully communicated to their partner who is the college, who 44 of our colleges have received grant funds to have a designated point person in charge of liaisoning with their facility. So I wonder if some language about an MOU could keep the colleges in there, but then also not burden probation to put something into writing with a college that they don't have a formalized partnership or a dedicated person to reach out to.
So would that also require in the MOUs about notification? I just want to be clear, because if we say for those, and again, then I want to scroll back up and look at attendance, because I'm wondering, are we restating some things here that have already been written? But I'm just thinking too, so back to the secondary, number one, if we have a kid who's in distance learning, no need to notify because they're in distance learning. If we have a youth who, if we're doing dual enrollment and we have a Rising Scholars class that's actually in person at the juvenile hall, which part of the Rising Scholars Grant is that's the requirement, is to have an in-person class. And so I think if a student is not going to be present in that class, there would be an obligation to notify them. Again, is that not included above in the expectations? If a youth is not going to be in person to a college class, as a college adjunct professor, really, attendance is not necessarily, you get positive points for attendance, but there's a lot of situations where I'm not notified when a student's not required to notify me if they're not coming to school.
Yeah, I guess, and I apologize, I didn't read administrative decisions as only being applicable to attendance. Like in
Okay.
some situations, so for this is just one example of what I would consider an administrative decision that I think we would benefit from having them put in writing. But for, let's say in the fall semester, the college was provided the block between 8 and 11 in order to run all college programming within the facility. And then they plan for the spring semester on the same block, right? And I hire a faculty member. The faculty member starts doing the course outline. And then as the semester approaches, there's been no formal communication, but it turns out actually that it's been switched. And now the college is being provided a 9 to noon window. And that actually doesn't work for this instructor because they also teach another class at the college. And so I think like that kind of like when the college is permitted to have the time block for college, I would have, I kind of associate that also as an administrative decision, but are we just speaking about attendance right here?
This is talking about behavioral management. And
Yeah,
so direct behavior, not necessarily of hours in a day that are designated for a college to come in and provide education. That would be in a different thing. This is kind of speaks to the vagueness because we all are all over the map.
yeah.
That school staff should be advised of administrative decisions regarding probably discipline, regarding some youth who's now possibly on most likely a room confinement. And that's a decision made by probation staff, and that will affect the educational programming of the student. Let me give you an example. If a youth is on a room confinement and they are not really agreeing or complying to be safe, and they're still combative, I need to let County Office of Education know, hey, this youth isn't going to be in class today. They are still in a situation where we can't, they can't be trusted to come out of their room. We have behavioral health working with them. What can you provide in a safe manner that you can provide education for this youth? That is what we will do immediately. We're like, that's what we do. And I think that's an expectation. So that's where I say it's an administrative decision based on a behavioral incident in this section. So that it will affect the educational programming of, it says students here, but it could be a student or students. Again,
Yeah,
vague.
no, I appreciate you clarifying that. I do think it would be helpful if a student was taking an in-person course because we do have things like excused withdrawals in the community
Mhm.
college system, which allow us to remove a student from a class like after the drop date, right? Without them getting penalized for future, like having that other W. So I do think that if it's possible to have some formal communication about a student who's unable to attend class for a specific reason,
Would that be one
communicated.
class? Kelly, would that be one class or just even to be able to complete the course? Because I understand those are two different things.
That's a great
One,
question. Yeah.
single day attendance
Yeah.
in comparison to, for example, I mean, someone just got put on a higher level of safety protocols based on behavior, and it could be prolonged, or they may have, I know I'm coming up with all different stuff, but I think that's
Yeah.
why it leads to the vagueness of this statement.
I'm kind of getting
Beth.
the feeling that this is more of a longer term thing because this is the first time I've really seen the language administrative decisions. typically if it's a missed class because of room confinement, it will be unit staff communicating with the school teacher or something like this, but administrative decisions made by probation staff that may affect educational programming, and it's not just not attending school that day. So for me, this almost sounds like it's a longer term thing. For example, a youth is attending an online class and is able to manipulate the internet and go to sites that they're not allowed to. You may withdraw the privileges of that student to use an unstructured, unsupervised laptop situation. Does that make sense? To me, this seems like it's something different than a daily attendance record.
Well, again, how can we make this more understandable? Because we're all kind of going different directions with how we might interpret this. And so if none of us have the same interpretation, it obviously is not clear. Because you just went down a whole different area.
So this to me seems like something different.
School staff shall be advised in writing or affect the ongoing educational. I'm gonna, oh, please, thank you, Chris. Please save
Oh,
us.
I don't have a solution, but I just wanted to ask for folks who have done the inspections, like what is the output you're looking at here? I agree it's vague. I think that we've obviously as a group come up with a lot of different interpretations. And I think as written, if I am a facility staff person, I don't know inherently what I'm supposed to communicate based off of this requirement. And I'm just curious if there are examples that BSCC staff could share of like what are the administrative decisions that are contemplated here. And if we don't have them, maybe that's something that we revisit, maybe not even with this group, but with the larger group to have them give us more time to enumerate what they might be.
So school discipline, if a student is suspended or expelled, this is K-12, because of something that occurred in a classroom or during instruction, then the teacher is required to write an incident report, and then they provide that incident report to facility administration, who then takes that report and they go through due process under 1390 for discipline, right?
If you're ready, asking the school about an incident report, I would refer, you can't
So
look at me.
Catherine.
You have to look at Catherine or.
So if a student is caught cheating and the teacher wants to suspend them for a class or an afternoon to the following day for a few days, they write an incident report.
I think that's
Oh,
going.
But they write
It's not called an incident report. There, it's, there, documentation is entered into the student information system as well as a suspension letter is issued and sent to the ed rights holder of the reason why. But even before that, before you can suspend any student in state law now is you have to have provided other means of correction. So a first offense would never result unless it was one of the big suspension, such as a weapon or something like that. You would never suspend on a first offense. You must have documentation that you've used other means of correction and try to remedy the ongoing problem before you would move to there. So there are multiple steps to all of that, and you have to have documentation regarding your other means of correction before you suspend. Then you must meet with the student and provide due process to them, hearing their side of the story versus what the administrators are saying of the reason to suspend. And then ultimately the administrator makes a decision. And then if you have IEPs added to that, that's a whole different level of how you address things.
On the flip side of that would be a situation where the youth did something that would impact or affect their ability to attend school. right? From a probation standpoint. So because this part of the regulation falls under school behavior management, school staff shall be advised of administrative decisions made by probation staff that may affect the educational programming of students. So based on a behavior that impacted a student where they could not go to school, Marguerite, what would a situation like that, what would that look like? Because under discipline, the kids have the right to go to school no matter what, unless,
Two things that would be, in my mind, is they're harm to themselves, they're harm to others. And again, that's kind of documented in above, but if we want to include it here, let's go to Michael, see, get some insight.
Yeah, so I know that there are situations, so like for instance, if there's a fight in the classroom and probation removes both students, and the following day only one of the students comes back because, you know, they're figuring out how to keep everyone peaceful. The school may not know why that second student is not coming the next day. That's what I'm, so that, how would that be communicated and then documented for the school that it's a probation decision to hold the student back rather than it being reflected as a, you know, a potential second day of suspension, which would not necessarily be the intent of the school.
That would be, again, it's, that would because the youth has been determined to remain a threat to the safety of other students. And that would be, otherwise we couldn't withhold them from school. They would have to be deemed that they are still a threat. And so they might be, and so that's where we would be putting them on some type of modified programming where they maybe wouldn't necessarily be in their room, but they're not safe to come back to a classroom. So we may modify their program to be doing school on a unit with an officer, and then then in that case, we would notify school to say, hey, this kid is, you know, they've come off room confinement, but we need to keep these two youth separated. They're still having behavioral issues, you know, not to the point where they're going to be in the room. And then school actually brings school to them. And that would be administrative decision by probation staff that affects the educational program. It needs to be modified in some way. So again, I think we just need to be clear, school staff will be advised in writing and immediately, I think, is the immediacy in the morning. And I know most juvenile halls have a morning meeting between teachers and probation staff, medical staff, and behavioral health staff. And they talk about the day of what's going on, if there is any behavioral problems, and there's notification done there. But I think if we want to be clear on this, school staff shall be advised as soon as reasonably possible and in writing of administrative decisions made by probation that will affect the, I think the educational programming of student or students, but it needs to be in the moment, you know, because educational programming, if we're saying that, we need to make it, how is that sounded for that day? Because, you know, Chris, you're talking about like, well, is that just ongoing? No, it can't be, because you're going to need to be able to articulate why a kid's on that, because programming means ongoing. So it needs to be clear there. And I think Joanne and I know we both have PBIS in our facilities. We would consider that a tier 3 intervention, right? A kid can't be engaged in the classroom, so we're going to do a higher level of intervention. So I think just the educational programming needs to be more clear, and advice needs to be documented, and it needs to be school staff need to be notified as soon as reasonably possible.
Can I ask, because as soon as possible can become ambiguous,
I agree, but yeah,
can we clarify and say on a daily basis prior to the start of
prior to
instruction?
the start of school.
Just because
Yeah.
the school needs some time also to make the adjust, what if they're gonna have to allocate resources to make sure that someone is available to go and provide that individualized support if needed.
And maybe we don't necessarily mean the advisement be in writing, because that could be, again, lost in the weeds. Maybe we just say the modification, this, and it needs to be documented.
I felt like in writing would help with the documentation. I feel like that would make it easier to check to see if it's happening, because like whoever's inspecting will able to just see. Either the person is going to say like, oh, we have no incidents to share, and that's why we have none, or they'll say that like we have incidents to share, and then they can't share the documentation, which means they're not complying with that particular aspect. And so just to clarify, are we talking about incidents that are reported under 1362 and then literally just saying like you have to communicate those with school staff or educational programming staff, whatever label we want to use? Because it sounds like as we talked about it further, the incidents that we landed on are when a young person is a harm to themselves or others, which I think falls under 1362. And so it's the sharing of that report or some information from that report with school staff. Would that help make it clearer?
I agree with you, Chris, because an incident where youth presents that type of risk should be documented in an incident report or an informational report, which is an incident report centered around informational purposes to make everybody aware of behaviors. But because this is under school quote discipline, now referred to as school behavior management, and it involves the language of being a high risk or safety risk to themselves or others, that type of language denotes 1362 requirements for an incident report. And so that could be the documentation that you're talking about. I don't think you provide incident reports to school staff, do you, Marguerite? I mean, you can, but it's not required.
We provide in
Information.
verbal summaries every morning of what happened the day before. Just like we're talking, we talk about who was booked in, who was released, results of court, which could impact, because schools need to be notified if a kid is going to have a release date. They need to be, they need to know about the fact that they are now detained for a certain period of time, because that will impact whether or not a new IEP needs to take place. So there's ongoing communication.
So I'm just wondering if this written documentation of a change, a modification to the youth educational situation, if that incident report could suffice the request for providing school written documentation, because it involves them, because you're developing an alternative school programming.
Are you saying that probation should give the County Office of Education a copy of our institution report? Because we actually can't. That's sharing the file, and that goes under 827. So we couldn't share the actual incident report, or we couldn't share the our room confinement report, because that is an 827 kind of the privacy, but we can document it in another way.
So I would inspect to the documentation, the incident report, but with reference to school, I'm just trying to see if there's a piece where the shared information and we're asking that it be written, staff be provided or advised with written notification of an administrative decision.
And I think we would need to leave it up to each individual facility about how that documentation, meaning the notification in writing, how they want it done, because I may look at County Office of Education and saying, hey, we have a kid who's, we have a kid It's water, people. It's water. I don't know if y'all heard the, anyways, if they are going to, how they want to be notified, because they may say, this is how we want to be notified. And so I don't want to put it so much detail in the regulations that we are now creating, again, procedures for facilities when it doesn't work for them.
I agree 100%. I was just looking for a killing two birds with one stone piece.
One bird at a time.
Okay.
Okay.
got it.
Michael.
Can I ask, just going back to the in writing, I think that's going to be a really important piece, because even if it's simple as like a court date or medical, if the teacher doesn't, and the teacher, let's say, takes it by word, marks that in their attendance, and then there's an audit, there's no way for that teacher to substantiate why that student wasn't in class other than someone told me they went to court that day, or they, like, and I'm not saying what the in writing needs to look like. I know at some facilities, it's just an email exchange in the morning. Here's our suspension list. Here's our holdback list. It can, the facilities can figure out how that works. But if a teacher's credential is on the line because of attendance concerns, I would want to make sure that I had in writing why I was entering attendance as such.
Okay, so I'm going to steal a line from Chris. I can live with in writing. I just want to make sure that the notification, which would be verbal prior to the start of class, are we saying too that in writing needs to be prior to the start of class? Or are we saying the notification and then also needs to be followed up, or does the writing need to happen prior to the start of class? How are people interpreting that? Michael, did you want to?
For auditing purposes, like as an administrator and I have to defend a teacher, I want to be able to pull up something and say, hey, look, this is why this teacher entered attendance the way they did for that day. I think once we go into backtracking to clean up attendance, it just sets a real complicated precedence. And I would rather just operate in real time. And usually those like you were describing, those conversations with the OD in the morning are enough to say, hey, look, I'm sending you the email with the kids that are being held back today. This is why. And then that the email is sent just so that there's documentation so that everyone's operating under the same understanding.
So for clarity, what does the acronym OD stand for you?
Sorry, Officer of the Day.
Okay, because I mean, a lot of facilities don't have that, so I wanted to be clear.
Or whoever the point person is for, usually the school administrator touches base with someone to kind of, just see what's going on. If there was an incident in a particular unit the night before, it's just a heads up, this unit or these kids are being held back. Only half the units coming out today. Whatever that is, just so if there was some kind of documentation, this way it just keeps everything accurate and on the same page.
Okay. I know as a parent, if my kid's not going to school, I don't usually call the school prior to school. I usually tell them afterwards or sometime during the morning. So I want to be clear, and because I can live with definitely that the school needs to be notified. And if for our facility, it's going to happen right at 8 o'clock in the morning when everybody's there at a school meeting that we have every single morning with our shift leader, who's a JSO, Juvenile Service Officer 3, a senior, who's leading that meeting, is going over everything, and they're notifying everybody who's not going to, what's going on. And I don't want to be penalized for doing great work of having a morning meeting, but then my shift leader didn't send an email prior to that meeting that at 8:30, a kid's not going to be present in class, because it will be discussed. I just want to be really careful about, like the prior, because maybe at 8 o'clock, the kid's totally still acting up. By 8:30, they're good to go. They've agreed they're going to be fine, and we're going to bring them to school. So I'm just from a perspective of a facility manager, that could be little challenging. So, Chris,
Would within 24 hours be a good alternative? That way, even if it's documented in writing, not necessarily beforehand, before the school day, it's still
I would
within
actually say-
24 hours. Would
I would
that be
actually say
better?
by the end of the school day. I think 24 is
Okay.
too much, but I'd say by the end of the school day. Yay.
That
Trish, you and
sounds
I are
good
going to
to
go have
me.
drinks. Okay, so um, before the start of the school day and in writing prior to the end of the school day. Is that what we're saying? Is that what we can have an agreed?
I think that works.
Okay,
I'm in agreement.
okay, awesome. Can we just gonna say, if you're gonna leave the meeting, you need. Um,
Okay, how do we want it?
um, so is it too wordy to say probation staff shall advise juvenile court school staff prior to the start of the school day of administrative decisions by probation staff that may affect additional program and students? Written, a follow-up. Now
Maybe if I start the first sentence with prior to the start of the day, and then we can
Okay.
pick up the next sentence with by the end of the school day.
okay. Shall be in writing, shall be. Each school day. Written documentation. You say that again, I'm good.
Well, they have to hear you, so if you could use your mic to let me know.
Could we just add written documentation of the probation administrative decision? Will be made available to school staff by the end of the school day?
I would actually say, will be provided to school staff by the end of the day rather than a made available, because made available is just like,
Yeah,
you're
no,
available
sure.
if you, so.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Can everybody live with that? 3, 2, 1, boom. Okay, let's try to get through, if we could, my goal, if we could get through 2 more points and stop prior to special populations, because we need a fresh brain in the morning, and then we can stop and then open to public comment. So if we can talk about the thirds, except as otherwise provided by the state education code, expulsions, suspensions from school shall be imposed when other means of correction fails to bring out proper conduct. School staff shall follow the appropriate due process safeguards as set forth in the state education code, including the rights of students with special needs. School staff shall document other means of correction used prior to imposing suspension, expulsions, if an suspension expulsion is ultimately imposed. This is all straight out of state education code that is going to be looked at in that educational evaluation that's done each year. So there's a lot of law here. And do we need to add more? Okay, Abigail, you have a,
Yeah, and I'm not sure whether we need to add it here, but it's because there is this paragraph about state education, school discipline, suspension and expulsion regulations, then it does seem odd not to include the fact that there are special protections for students with IEPs. So I would say that is generally, that's an education requirement, not a probation requirement, yet we have this, paragraph about expulsion, so it seems, if we're gonna have that it should include those special protections.
well, it does state in here, appropriate
Yeah, I
due
guess
process safeguards as set forth in state education code, including the rights of students with special needs.
But I
And
think
then-
we could
oh,
add
Okay,
state education code and IDEA.
and spell out IDEA, please.
Individual, you're
Disability.
putting me on,
Individuals with
Education Act.
disabilities education, yeah.
thank you.
So if we added that, because then we're gonna get into the weeds more in.
Yeah,
D.
I think
Okay.
that's,
Okay.
that should be sufficient. Thank
So Catherine's gonna repeat what she just, said she's gonna wordsmith and add.
Well, I think it's just, except as otherwise provided by the state education code and the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act.
Maybe IDEA and then
Yeah.
spell out what individuals with, yeah.
And then later on, I would say where it says state education code later in there and IDEA.
Exactly, yeah.
Is that good? Got a thumbs up?
Thank you.
Woohoo! All right. Number 4, the facility administrator in conjunction with education staff will develop policies and procedures that address the rights of any student who has continually difficulty completing a school day. Chris,
This comes from I think it's, oh, I don't remember it's the coalition letter. It might be attachment Q. I know that there is a written suggestion
it's you. I
around
just wanna
like,
know.
it's you. So I was like, it's me. And I'm like, oh yeah,
That's not you,
attachment
it's you.
you.
It's the
No,
actual
I get it.
letter you. It's you. It's Chris.
So I think that there was a suggestion there about trying to figure out that after a certain number of days, that there's a requirement that there's a meeting between education staff and probation staff to develop a case plan. And it references section 1351B, which is where the case plans come from, and then 1370E about educational screening, that perhaps the young person having a difficulty around completing the school day might need to be assessed for an IEP, and that's something that could be discussed at that meeting. The language, and it's in the attachment, has after 3 days of struggling to complete the school day that meeting happened, but I am flexible about the cadence of what cadence is actually workable within the facility. But I think it was just an idea that after a certain number of days, staff would come together and have a meeting to discuss the needs of that individual young person.
I agree that we can't be prescribed to 3 days, because if we have a kid who's coming in and they're withdrawing from like fentanyl or heroin, which we've experienced, it's taking them a significant period of time to actually get regulated in a place physically and mentally to be able to start going to school. I'm giving you other situations too, where we had a young girl who was sexually victimized and traumatized over a period of time, and she was not in a place. So I think by so it took her a couple weeks before she was able to actually enter back into a classroom. I think, so putting on days wise, I think we just need to maybe say, after a certain amount of time, a plan a plan needs to be in place, but that could be addressed somewhere else, because and this goes back to, Chris, with your data stating as to the absenteeism. I would want to know, is that absenteeism overall, or is that absenteeism that one youth is driving that? Because we can have one youth who's, not attending school for some really significant issues that go beyond just them not wanting to be in school. So this is a sensitive area, I think, that we need to make sure that we're addressing in a manner that's not just 5 days and you need to get them back in or something. So
I think the spirit of the suggestion wasn't necessarily like that's the timeline to get the kid back into school, but like a certain number of days of difficulty triggers that review. There already is a requirement under 1351B to develop an education plan for the young person who are present for a certain number of days. And I think it's really just like, what is a trigger to cause a review? That like, is there a certain number of days of consecutive, of a young person having that difficulty that's described in this subpart that would trigger the need to have a review that would be required. And I think that's the idea, not with a goal of like that young person at the end of that review plan will be in the classroom the next day, but that there is a meeting that's held to discuss, okay, what is the path forward for this young person? So I think it's like looking at what's the trigger to call for that meeting, to require that meeting to happen, and not necessarily like what is the trigger to require that young person is in school the next day, and like that people are penalized or judged for not being able to do that. I totally get that there are a number of reasons why a young person would be struggling with withdrawal, with issues around addiction, with issues around being victimized that make it difficult for them to be present in the classroom. And I think I was just trying to trigger about when a review happens, and have there be some kind of standard of like after a certain number of days a review should happen, and that's kind of laid out there.
I would go so far as to say it shouldn't just be who is having difficulty completing a school day, but is having difficulty, who isn't making educational progress. I think we could add some language to it, and there is in the school systems, there is a system in place, a student study team. People call it different things in different districts. They call it a family student team meeting, but it's the first step for everybody to come together and review the student record and what's going on to determine what the next steps are, whether it's some kind of MTSS approach where we put the student on a behavior contract to address the reasons of not making it through a school day, all the way to do we need to look at a 504 plan or assessing for an IEP? I think every school system has that in place. It's prescribed.
And there's also a couple regulations that sort of speak to this. 1354 separation, separation of a youth, and if it's difficulty in the classroom, separation of youth for reasons that include but are not limited to medical and mental health conditions, assaultive behavior, disciplinary consequences, and protective custody. For anything related to those that could cause or create difficulty in the school day, and a youth is separated from the educational setting for whatever reason, regulation requires a daily review of separated youth. So that's something to think about. The other regulation, institutional assessment and case plans, 1355. The case plan should include and not be limited to written documentation that provides objectives and timeframes for resolution of problems identified, which this obviously would be a problem. A plan for meeting the objectives that includes a description of the program resources needed and individuals responsible for assuring the plan is implemented. And the most important part, periodic evaluation of progress toward meeting the objective in the plan. So there's no timeline. Periodic is one of those words in regulation that drives me insane because periodic review for me and periodic review for someone else could be completely different. But we always, in terms of technical assistance to our counties, when situations like this come up, because school is such an important part of a youth's day, it's an important part of any young person's day, that needs to be prioritized. And best practice recommendations are that you do get together with your education partners and your medical and mental health partners to come up with alternatives or solutions for the youth. So I just wanted to make sure you all knew that there are 2 other regulations that speak to this in a limited way.
Abigail.
I do still think it would be helpful to have something. I understand maybe the 3 days is too prescriptive, but I don't think about it if, you know, if a child who's at home is not coming to school, there's going to be a meeting, right? Like something's going to happen pretty quickly after that. And so this is, you know, but this is the equivalent, right? That we're going to have that conversation between probation staff and school staff pretty quickly if a student is not coming to school. And maybe the conversation is they're in withdrawal, it's going to be a couple weeks, but maybe it's something different, right? And so I do think even if we don't want to be as prescriptive as number of days, I think, you know, encouraging that meeting happen just in the ways that it would if the child was at home with their parents, I think given the importance of the issue could be helpful and responsive to some of the comments we received.
What I'm hearing then is have some days and also add in continuing difficulty completing a school day, maybe difficulty attending school, completing a school day, or experiencing educational success. Because if a kid's ongoingly having not educational success, or not experiencing educational success, we should start developing a plan. If we want to just stick with I guess the essence of this in continuing difficulty completing a school day, if we look at a plan will be created in collaboration with probation and education and maybe in facility partners, because then if that youth is having that challenge, I'd want to include behavioral health. I'd also want to include public health because that could be a physical issue going on, to establish a plan to re-engage this youth into school on a daily basis. So
So this part of the regulation really just says the administrator and education staff develop policies and procedures. It doesn't say anything beyond that of what those policies and procedures should look like. So would it be helpful to say a timeline and plan for reintegrating the youth? Well, a plan to re-engage?
you know,
Something like that.
maybe we should table this one for tomorrow, do some more thought on it, because this is obviously going to take more than what we have for today, and we give public comment the ability to provide public comment for the last 15 minutes. Is everybody okay if we table this for tomorrow? Because I don't want to rush through it. It seems like an important one.
Can we just make a note that I think section 1355 would be a useful plan, just like because that there already is a plan that's required under Title 15, so it's like revisiting that plan I think would be useful. But we can talk about it tomorrow.
Yeah, no, let's put those notes there. Okay. And members too, if you can start looking at your calendar for future dates. I'm not sure if we're going to get through the rest of it tomorrow, as much as I would like to.
So, same as this morning, there is nobody here in person to take, in-person public comments. For Zoom attendees. If you could please, raise your virtual hand. We will put you in a queue and Howie will call upon you and we'll ask you to unmute your Zoom. If you're on the phone, you can dial *9. And again, same as before, we'll have 2 minutes. We'll have 2 minutes on the screen. Howie, our first public commenter.
We have Adrina Rochelle.
Hi, go ahead, Katrina.
Hi, AB 167 gives juveniles the option to opt out on receiving a full education. It only requires them between 130 and 150 credits to graduate, which my son almost achieved in less than a year. As a reward for receiving your high school diploma, we've been informed that the court will credit half a year to a year on a juvenile sentence for an early release. I'm not sure how true this information is, as LA probation lost the community's trust, making their words not credible. Ultimately, youth are opting out on receiving a full education to get out of the horrible conditions they're required to live in early. It seems like an easy route for probation and LACO to avoid rendering full services. Getting youth college ready is essential for their future, to be able to keep up with the curriculum as well as their peers who received a full education in school settings outside of a juvenile detention facility. I don't believe offering our youth a reward to opt out on receiving a full education is beneficial. Why not reward them for being an honor student or for their attendance? An experience my son encountered at Barry J was when a couple individuals disrupted and walked out of class. The teacher in return punished and dismissed the whole class and wrongfully placed the school write-up in my son's file that we had to overturn in court. There needs to be a policy established on disciplinary action for this type of behavior amongst school administrators, as they are allowed to continue rising tension amongst youth. Also, when including wording such as may include courses that prepare youth for participation in post-secondary education is very concerning in this scenario. Let's just say our youth graduate and these programs aren't offered. It puts juveniles in a position with little to fall on if they do decide to opt out on a full education to graduate early. It's a clause. It's like a clause for facilities who are not performing well as others. That's it.
Thank you. Howie, who's next?
We have no more raised hands.
Okay, just double checking in our participants that there are no other people looking to make public comment. Any members in the room or on the Zoom? Oh, that rhymed. I made a poem. Anybody in the room or in the Zoom like to make any final comments? We'll wrap up. We will reconvene here 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. Same format. We'll work 9 to 12. We'll take a lunch break from 12 to 1 and then go until 4. Any closing statements?
Just thank you. Thank you all for the opportunity and the collaboration.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and I'll pass it back over to Marguerite.
Yes, thank you, everyone. Appreciate it. And we will take the notes that we have for the last point of school behavior management. We will address that tomorrow, and then we will move forward from there. I am serious about it, really kind of looking at your calendars, unless we can be committed to moving forward. We've actually gotten through half of it, and I think it took us about 2.5 hours to get through the first paragraph. So, you know, we caught our ground after that. So appreciate that, and we'll see you all in the morning. Have a safe night.
Thank you.
Have a good day, y'all.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Take care.